Okay, it is 2 o'clock and it's been a day of learning, folks, and we're rocking. And on the forecast is our Discovering Racial Justice panel. We have three keynote speakers, and I'll jump right into that. But real quick, I just wanted to kind of tell you the vision of this Discovering Racial Justice panel. So I identify as a biracial Black woman. I'm a mother and I of three multiracial children. I identify as a survivor and a victim, and I am a strong advocate for anti-violence. And I was really thinking about like my own commitment to racial justice, being a person of color, recognizing my own privilege, recognizing the work that I do, recognizing what I see impacts me on a regular basis, and then looking around and seeing who is visibly present, homeless, and who is invisibly experiencing homelessness, and how they are able to walk through those steps with the help of folks like us. And so when we're talking about de-escalation, we have to incorporate systemic oppression, but we can't just end there. We have to talk about racial justice. And so I thought that this would be a really good opportunity for me to bring some folks to the table for them to share. I've witnessed them share their resiliency and how they operate and navigate oppressive systems, doing anti-oppression work. Does that make sense? So like, how are folks actually navigating doing this work day in and day out, and then ultimately actually having to survive under duress because of systemic oppression? That is so empowering to me, and we can learn a lot from the folks. So I really encourage folks to, lend a listening ear, and feel free to, I do want to mention in the Jamboard is a thank you and so a section, a slide that you can place follow-up questions for the panelists. Hopefully we'll be able to stroll through the panel questions, but I want to provide space for the panelists in any follow-up questions that will feel free. I will make sure that the keynote speakers get those questions and that they can follow up with you all. Does that, I hope that that works, because I recognize that we only have 45 minutes. This panel will only be from 2 to 2:45, and then at 45 after, then I'm just going to recap and we're going to roll it up, wrap it up. Okay, but before I even go even further than that, I think it's a really good note for us to, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. Usually I start with a land acknowledgement at the beginning of trainings, and I thought that this would be a good space for it because we're talking about racial justice, and this is a tool that we can use every day in our everyday practice to actually interrupt oppression and practice racial justice. I will try my best to pronunciate everything clearly. Multnomah County rests on stolen lands of the Multnomah, Klamath, and Clackamas bands of Chinook Indian Nation, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many others along the Columbian River. This country is built on stolen indigenous land and built by stolen African people. This land was not stolen, and people were not enslaved by ambiguous entities and actors. The land was stolen by, and African people were enslaved by white settlers who had government support. We also want to honor the members of over 400 tribal communities who live in Multnomah County. Many of these people and their cultures still survive and resist despite the intentional and ongoing attempts to destroy them. Thank you for taking a moment to acknowledge this history of how we are here in this place and to honor the people. We use the land acknowledgements as another tool, again, to dismantle colonialism that manifests in how we hold meetings, how we engage in relationships in these spaces, including who and who isn't in this room, and how we all have active roles in dismantling the systems that benefit whiteness at the expense and exploitation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and communities. Thank you for that. It triggers me up to read that. It's hard. It's hard to read that because I feel like that's a history that I should have been taught many years ago. And there's a reason why I can't pronounce these names. There's a reason why I have a hard time reading this history about me, even though I've experienced it. So let's just sit with that and provide grace for folks that take the courage to even do that land acknowledgements and respect the land and indigenous folks, because this is their land. With that being said, I'm honored to introduce our panelists. And I will like to start by just again reiterating that our three panelists are Joshua Bates, the interim deputy director at the Joint Office, and Destiny Sanchez. Destiny Sanchez works as a data technician assistant for adult and family systems. She just got promoted, and she will be able to tell you a little bit about her position right now. And then Richard Gilliam, who is working with our outreach teams and definitely leading a leadership role over there. I'm so excited. And I just wanted to give an opportunity for you all to introduce yourselves and let folks know how you identify yourself. And I guess I can just start with, would anybody like to go first?
I'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you so much, Alexandra, and also Joshua and everybody who has already spoken before. My name is Destiny Sanchez. I use she, they pronouns, and Alexandra is right. I recently got a new position on the coordinated access team as a program technician. So I'll be working with that team as the Metro Supportive Housing measure goes into effect. So just a little bit about me and what I'm currently doing.
Hi, I'm Richard Gilliam, and I'm glad that Destiny got a promotion because that allowed me to. I'm currently, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm currently the Shelter Outreach Supply Center Specialist. It's my new position.
And I just talked for an hour and 15 minutes, so I feel weird introducing myself. But I'm Joshua Bates. I'm the interim deputy director at the Joint Office of Home Services, and I use he, him, and his pronouns.
Thank you so much again for all three of you on short notice taking this opportunity. And I'm just going to jump right into it. I mean, you're all individuals, and that's one of the things is I really want to capture the uniqueness of each of you. As of right now, I mean, there's three panelists posted, and you are visibly to me people of color. And I don't want to lump people of color. I want to interrupt the question, not lump everybody into the same, groupings. I want to individually meet people where they're at, including my coworkers, because I know at one point in time we're all going to be working together. And so, like, I want to know, me personally, what are your triggers regarding, navigating systemic oppression? And being the person that you identify that you are. And I can pick on Richard. I'll go with Richard, roundtable.
Okay, that's fine. There's many triggers. As a Black man in this society, there are daily instances that remind you of who you are, as if you need to be reminded. And where we are, as a country, just within the last week, with respect to excessive policing and murder of individuals by law enforcement. It reminds me, it triggers me back to many Black men, I think, could probably comment or relate to this, times where I've had my face plastered onto the hood of a police car, mistaken identity, the times that I've come from a car dealership, purchasing a new car and being pulled over by multiple police officers. And where'd you get this car from? What do you do? What are you drinking? Oh, that's water. Okay. That sort of thing. Constantly, I'll use a Baldwin quote as, Joshua did earlier, and I'll paraphrase it, but to be Black and live in this country is to be in a constant state of rage. It could be a rage where it's external and unproductive, or it can be internalized where we, in fact, draw into ourselves to inspire ourselves to do better and to work on social justice and to make things better. I choose to do that. I don't choose, there's someone asked me just the other day, and I'll end it up because sometimes I'm one of these people that you ask me what time it is, and sometimes I can tell you how to build a clock. So that's probably inappropriate at this juncture. However,
I like that.
yeah, but someone asked me, are you angry about the latest killing? And of course I am. I've been, dealing with this, and we've been dealing with this societally, in terms of our society, and me in particular, since Eleanor Bumpurs, which is the '80s, the mid '80s. So these are triggers that happen. So I'm gonna let others on the panel comment on that. So I've said what I have to say.
Thank you, Richard. What about you and Destiny and Josh? Do you share the same or different ones? I heard policing, heard history.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard, for just being very honest about, what your experience has been like. And I think that's, that ties into like what my triggers are. My triggers are when people have a lack of information about this historical and current day, experiences of racism that Black and Brown Indigenous people experience. Because that tells me that I'm not important enough for you to learn the history about my oppression and the people before me and their oppression. It comes down to like the very basic interactions that you have with people. If they're uneducated about just the general experience of your peoples and what it's like for you to live through each day, that impacts your relationship to them, and that impacts how people of color feel they can show up in spaces, because we don't always get to have those authentic relationships with people. And so I guess that just leads into, it can be really minor things, and it can be things that are just that you've lived over and over again each day. Maybe Joshua has more to add about what some of his triggers are too.
Yeah, this is an intense question, talking about our triggers, because even in talking about the triggers, you sort of are triggered, right? It's kind of like a meta thing. And I think that I share a lot of the same triggers as Destiny and Richard. I think that especially when it comes to policing, like that's an overt one. The other day I was driving, I'm building this thing that I can't stop building. It's not going well. And I was driving to Lowe's, but I had to take my truck instead of my car. And my car is like a dad Subaru untinted, the least cool car you can imagine. And my truck is like a raised, really ugly old hoopty that has tinted windows. And I drove past the same sheriff's office that I drive past every single day in my Subaru. And for some reason, because I was in my truck, or maybe it's because I don't know what it was, a sheriff's car pulled up behind me and followed me all the way from the town that I live in to the city that I was going to, which is about 20 miles. And the entire time I was sweating. I was holding the wheel tight. I was thinking about, should I stick my hands out the window and just let them show that I'm unarmed? And it's almost like I was trying to go through all the different steps that I could do to prevent this me getting pulled over from potentially being a fatal encounter. And I think that is something that is a massive trigger, right? Because to Richard's point, there's so many times that I've been stalked by the police. I've been accosted by the police. I've been unjustly detained by the police. It's part of me coming into understanding of what it means to be a Black man versus a Black boy, because it started at such a young age for me. And I think that when it comes to my triggers too, it's also that the people that me as a Black man, I'm trying to figure out how to survive this institution, right? The institution isn't figuring out how to correct themselves. I'm trying to survive. And I think that's a trigger, right? That the people that are being oppressed, that are figuring out, are the ones that all of the responsibility is on. And I hate that. I think that's a terrible thing. The system should change to serve us, because that's the purpose of these institutions in like, the purpose of them. But really they were designed to oppress us. I think that another thing that really, really upsets me, and this isn't something that anyone uplifted just yet, but I wanted to uplift it, is I think that the academic needs, I guess you would say, of racial justice work bothers me too. It triggers me, right? Because folks uplift like, hey, I've read this author, that author, this author, that author. I can recite all of these different quotes and statistics and all these things. And I'm like, that's really wonderful. That's a great thing. I'm glad that you're doing your research. And that all that knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that you're pushing back against racism. Like, how are you showing up in support of your Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian sisters and brothers and siblings here in our community? Also, too, is that knowledge supposed to be elevated against folks with lived experience who have lived through redlining, lived through Jim Crow, lived through gentrification? I think that kind of dynamic is also a trigger of mine, because the hard work of racial justice work is through organizing. In the words of Kwame Ture, sorry, I just quoted someone, I'm just complaining about it. Organize, organize, organize. And organizing and groundwork and community work, that's where racial justice work comes from. So anyways, I'm gonna hop off. I've talked too much. I've been talking too much, so I'm gonna stop.
No.
Alexandra, another trigger for me at least, and I don't know if the other panelists feel this way, probably do, but language, advertent or inadvertent. The prior, and at the risk of being too political, the 44th president of the United States, when facing an impeachment, used an analogy of lynching. I personally have a family history of related to lynching. My mother was a native Arkansan back in 1927, was almost lynched at 70 years old because she complained about working conditions, sharecropping working conditions, had to be snuck out underneath a blanket in the middle of the night. And that's how my family came to be in Chicago, because of a 7-year-old girl who was my mother. And she just passed away, and we had her almost 98 years, but just passed away, and she experienced that. And so that when that was evoked, when that whole specter of lynching was evoked because of a political dynamic, it angered me, because 1927 just happened to be, and of course I did my research on it, had to be the highest year for lynchings of Black folks in Arkansas. And so we went through a history of lynching, and it's very analogous to today. Some would say that some of the murders of unarmed Black individuals by law enforcement is another our generation's lynching, if you will. So triggers can be manifested in a lot of different ways. Language, mass media. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful, always cognizant of that, and careful about how we navigate that, how we process that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So that's the next question, right? So it's like being able to identify your triggers, but then like having those triggers being compacted. Like how do you process those triggers? Like how do you navigate the oppression that happens to you, and then like institutional oppression, which is two different questions, and I want to give you all options, right? I don't want us to weigh so much on us. We've already talked a lot, but like either way you want to take it, like how being oppressed, and being triggered, like how do you survive? How do you sustain? And then, yeah, I'll stop there. And or like how are we actually sustaining operating in a government environment when it was built on institutional racism?
So real quick, I want to like Richard really kind of hit on another one of my triggers, and it's something that I didn't talk about. And I think that it's the sharing of violence being done and murder being done to people of color. That's a huge trigger of mine. To Richard's point, right? If we are to understand these modern murders of people of color at the hands of the police and in other ways to be lynching, what does it mean to be sharing these things? And then like saying, oh, hey, this is terrible, this is horrible, but you keep sharing them and sharing them and sharing them. And what does that do to our psyche, a collective psyche, right? To constantly be having to see the death and the murder of our community members. So I think that is a trigger of mine. And it's also something that it's something that I don't think should be done. I don't think that's healthy. And I think that it's also a weird manifestation of like a perpetuation of that violence, right? To continue to show people of color that this is what can happen to you, and this is what does happen to you, and folks are sharing it for a reason, because they want other folks to see it. So anyways, I think that that's something that is a trigger of mine.
Yeah, the
My
normal.
apologies about not answering your
No,
question.
I'm thank you. You know, I mean, that the normalization of violence towards Black people, and that was a great connection that we need to pull into place, because we think it's a different form of violence, but it's the same stuff perpetuating itself. And so what does that do to generational cycles of trauma and abuse, and how that psychologically affects us, and how it psychologically affects people that are non-brown and Black to not react? You know, and then to connect to what Destiny was talking about, my trigger is not being educated. And you talked about, okay, being educated is one thing, but how are you going to use that education? So like, I love this conversation, but like, let's get to it. Like, let's share, like, how are y'all navigating this? You know, like having to deal with oppression yourselves internally, because to Richard's point earlier, sometimes we internalize that oppression, start feeling negatively about ourselves, and start believing the stuff that folks tell. I know I did. I started to believe it, and I fulfilled a 20-year self-fulfilling prophecy, which was not good. Okay, I came back, but I mean, not all folks are able to make it. But so like, let's empower some folks here, and let's discuss those strategies.
Yeah, I just for context, when I was younger, I went through the foster care system. My family, a brown family growing up in Riverside County, you know, through the 90s, they were oppressed, and they didn't have a lot of resources, and became involved in gangs as well as substance abuse. And so, you know, I wasn't able to stay with my family. And through that, I was adopted into a Mexican family that, you know, grew up in LA County through that time. And one of the like most impactful things, I think, for myself and my identity has been that through my abuela's time being one of the first families in LA County, in Redondo Beach, she, you know, as she was growing up and going to schools and becoming acclimated to American culture, she was told that she wasn't allowed to speak her native tongue in school. And so just a lot of these elements, you know, about people of color in different ways and across different systems, you know, we lose aspects of our cultural and our cultural identity, even just what it means to be a person of color able to live freely. Like so many of our people have been told that they can't exhibit those natural human behaviors. And so flash forward to the work that I'm doing, you know, I consider myself young. I think I'm probably the youngest person in our office. I'll be 25 this year. And so for me, I think that my process of like learning how to navigate these spaces has been very different from a lot of my colleagues, either because they've already, you know, been working in these spaces, or have had family that have worked in these spaces, or for whatever reasons, you know, we all have our different experiences. But for me, one of the most impactful things has been taking the time to unpack and understand what makes my experience as a person of color so hard, but also so beautiful, and using those things to inform my decisions about how I'm supporting people and the community that I'm building. You know, because as human beings, like we thrive off of community with one another. And even though that can be so hard when we're going through trauma, or, you know, when we're experiencing these debilitating life events on a daily basis, it's really impactful to find people that, you know, you can trust and build community with, and share your experiences with them. And not in the way that like we're trauma bonding with people, but in the way that we're bonding with people because we share a similar appreciation for life, right? Like we all have overcome and continue on a daily basis to fight against these oppressive structures, and asking those questions of, you know, why do these barriers exist, and are we really looking at the true impact that these barriers are placing on people, even though, you know, sometimes we find ourselves joining nonprofits or just whatever effort that we join, finding the ways that organization is not living up to their expectations and holding them accountable in those spaces, I think is also something that I really strive and work to do. And, I was kind of telling this to Richard, like, if I don't have the questions, like I'll figure out which tree to shake down and get that answer. Cause it might take some time, but I think that's a barrier that we face too, is that things are so like structured or siloed off, and people feel like they don't have the right answers or they don't know how to do the work. But I think it's a matter of like opening up those communication channels and inviting people into those spaces that normally wouldn't be there, or that you've never even imagined, had impact in those spaces.
Thank you, Destiny.
I used a couple of strategies with respect to navigation, and I would characterize them as three basic strategies. First would be, my home training. I look at what was taught to me. I brought up an instance, brought up an example about my mother's experience almost being lynched. However, what I didn't say was that throughout my lifetime, all these experiences she had, she was able to teach me, and I'm able to use those experiences and those lessons. She would go on to tell me about a situation about how in 1968 she had and I grew up in Chicago, I should say. I'm sorry, I should give you context. One of the most racially segregated cities in America, historically and to this present day. But she would tell me about 1968, about after Dr. King was assassinated and the civil unrest uprising that occurred there in Chicago as a result of that, and how she had this one boss who was very negative to her, and how, but a situation where his life was threatened that night because there was a group of folks that saying, no, we're going to do violence to him, and asked her, could she help him? And of course she did. And she used that as an example to teach about how to, despite some of the negative racial issues that happen, how it's important to do the right thing. And that helped me to navigate, even though I may have experienced negative racial experiences, about staying focused on doing the right thing and relying back on her, on my family training. Another one is keeping cognizant of the future and teaching our young about how to navigate these systems. I've been a mentor to young men at Jefferson and Ockley Green, Boise Elliott here in recent years, for the last 7 years or so, and being able to teach them about my experiences and what they're facing and how it's important to de-escalate situations, as we've been talking about today. That's very important. And I think, also just looking at the situation as that we're going to deal with these. We're going to be dealing with this right now. I think Joshua had mentioned that within our lifetime, yes, we thought, some of us would say, making a comment that, after we had the first Black president, that we were in a post-racial situation, which was for some of us very laughable. I was indeed there that night when he won the presidency in Grant Park, and kind of knew that no, we still have a long way to go, but we've come a long way. But I'm thinking that, if I were to give advice about navigating these systems, I would say that, staying focused on who you are and what you're there to do and to accomplish, and the important work that we do. We can't let others' attitudes and oppression keep us from moving forward. We have to look at things historically. How did folks living in Northeast Portland and Albina, who were relegated to that area, how did they deal with one of the most racially oppressive states in our nation? Didn't even ratify the 15th Amendment to 1959. So we have very unique history here. We have individuals who navigate these systems. They have survived it. we have, with respect to our ancestors, we have an inherent responsibility, I think, to be able to find solutions to be able to navigate these systems. So I would say that's, in 40 words less, that's probably my my answer to that.
That's awesome. Josh, do you have
Yeah, I
anything?
guess I got it. My two other panelists really covered a lot. I don't know if I have anything. I do have things to add, but I really appreciate all the comments that folks added. I think that Destiny really hit on something that I think is something that I do, which is, and it's a powerful thing that she said, right? Which is figuring out which tree to shake, like figuring things out. And I think that what I've tried to do, at least in my career, is, and maybe not, it isn't the best way to go, but is to understand how systems of oppression impact these social systems and figuring out which levers I can push on to change these systems and eliminate racism within these systems. So like figuring out what tree to shake is like kind of, almost been my life course, in regards to my professional career. And I think that it was a really powerful, I've never thought of it as in that metaphor, but that's a powerful metaphor. And I think that also when I'm thinking about which trees to shake, I also have to like look at myself and figure out what I need to shake, or what tree I'm living in, right? Like what's going on in me, And what I mean by that is that I oftentimes externalize systems of oppression, right? We look external and we say, oh, oppression's over there or oppression's over here. But sometimes we also have to look internally and say, okay, I'm perpetuating this thing, this system of oppression in the way that I'm showing up, in the way that I'm conducting myself, in the way that I'm participating in the system. I think in stories very often, so I'm gonna tell a little story. In my first year of graduate school, I went to graduate school for African American Studies and City Planning. I was part of this community facilitation as a graduate student, and it was in a historically Black part of Columbus, Ohio. And when I was over there facilitating this meeting, this woman comes up to me. She's like, hey, where are you from? I don't recognize your accent. And I'm like, oh, and I mean, this is when I had just moved from Southern California, so I probably talked far differently than I do now. And I'm like, oh, I just came here from Los Angeles. She's like, oh, what are you doing here over here it's called the King Lincoln District. And I was like, oh, I'm over here. I'm part of this class in graduate school. We're trying to learn about what it is your community would like to see in this area plan. And she's like, so I have a question to ask you. What the heck does some spoiled brat from Los Angeles know about the Black community in Central Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio? And I'm like, oh, and then, I was like, I was at a loss for words. And then I moved to another table and the exact same thing came up. And I eventually my professor asked me to stand outside because I was caught. I mean, I didn't mean to cause that chaos, but it was happening. But it was really an instructive moment for me because I learned that even though I understood myself to be part of the Black community, I understood that I had, I barely graduated high school. I graduated high school with a 1.4 GPA. I did not even start college until I was in my mid-20s. Like all of these things like that where I understood myself to come from didn't matter when I was showing up in that space, right? It didn't matter like the ways that I had experienced poverty or homelessness or any of the things I experienced as a youth and a young person. What mattered in that moment is that I was a part of that system. I was a part of Ohio State. I was showing up and I was perpetuating gentrification in that community. And if you look at that community now, that meeting happened in 2013. If you look at that community now in 2021, it looks like Albina looks here in Portland. So I was a part of gentrification, and I was not reflective on the way that I was showing up and the things that I was perpetuating in that moment. And I think that has always been a key part of the way that I navigate oppression, is by thinking about the ways that I'm perpetuating things. And it was really that moment that call-in that a woman did for me that really changed the way that I show up. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the cool things about transformative justice is recognizing that the victim could also be a perpetrator as well. So although I'm very clear that although I am oppressed, I have power, I have light privilege, and I can definitely do some harm, and so then I have to be mindful of that. I have to be mindful of my triggers. I have to be mindful of everybody else around me. I have to be mindful of how I'm going to process everything. I mean, it's just consistent all the time. However, at least I know what I'm falling into, right? I'm clear about this. There was a large portion of my life where I thought I was the one that was going insane. And so like, this is really resonating with me and validating me and encouraging me to like say, okay, this is I have uniqueness, but these are shared feelings and emotions, and folks are showing up. And so that invigorates me. And I know we're winding down. We have 10 minutes. There is one specific question that I had left that I sent the keynote speakers, which is along the lines of, what de-escalation strategies do you use that have been effective for you, or ones that you are strengthening? And then you can also share, like, how do we create safer spaces for people of color? You know, how are we actively, it's connected to the last thing, but like, how are you actively creating safer spaces for yourself and for others around you if you can't do for yourself? And I think that that's the last question I have. And I have been noting the comments in the chat, but I just wanted to show respect to our panelists and pay attention. And so definitely thank you so much for those that have been participating in the chat, and feel free to maybe pop in a question, maybe. But yeah, how are y'all remaining safe or creating safer spaces?
I don't mind going first. I didn't know if Richard was reaching towards the unmute, so I would say one major thing that helps me de-escalate is first, like we've been talking about, is just, scanning myself, making sure that I'm not escalated, because, you never want to enter a situation where somebody else is escalated and you're supposed to be serving the support role, but you're also escalated. And that can be really hard, especially for people of color working in these spaces, because, like we mentioned, our triggers can be something that's very small, or it can be something that is larger. And sometimes when you encounter those triggers, you don't have time to react or check yourself. And so making sure that you're creating that space and just being very clear about boundaries is super important. And like I said, using those de-escalation skills on yourself and making sure that you're feeling right and you're feeling like you can support this person, because the last thing we need is two people in crisis trying to support each other, because that's not really productive to anybody in the situation, and that's not a supportive model of helping someone.
That's awesome, Destiny.
In my instance, I would say my experience specifically with relating to the work that we do is modeling the behavior that you would like to see with respect to de-escalation. Just very quickly, I know we're running down time here, but I had a situation at one of the shelters where guests observed a kind of a racial incident happening to me right outside of the shelter. And guests were out there and they noticed how I handled things. It was through some white individuals who were attacking me, if you will. But I did not escalate. I was very cognizant, nor would I have done it if they weren't there, but I was very cognizant that guests were observing what was happening. I could have gone another direction, a more adversarial, but it wasn't necessary at that juncture. I was able to talk down the situation, and afterwards, guests had mentioned how that was really great how that was handled. So, modeling the behavior that you want to see in others with respect to de-escalation. That doesn't mean not calling people out, but it's just being very cognizant about things and very cognizant about behaviors. And like I said, just wanting to make sure you're modeling, make sure the very de-escalation that you hope to inspire, that you're modeling that de-escalation. So that's what happened in my instance.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, geez, this is once again, my panel, like other panelists really answer this question. I think that Destiny really kind of hit on the nail on the head when it comes to what I do. Is like I try to me being elevated in any situation doesn't help anyone, right? Like me coming in and being elevated when someone else is elevated, all that's going to do is be two fires that turn into an inferno that messes everything up. And I'm not trying to burn down anything. So I think that it's really important for me in that moment to understand when I am trying to de-escalate, and the vast majority of my experiences with kids and youth between the ages of 9 and 17 is recognizing my triggers, recognizing when I'm elevated, also when I'm engaging, especially with youth, but people in general, when it comes to de-escalation, is trying to be an active listener, like trying not to make light of what someone is experiencing, trying not to contextualize what someone is experiencing, not trying to also like empathize by like, well, I went through the exact same thing. Like that, none of that actually, I don't think has been an effective way, an approach for the way that I have de-escalated like situations. I think that to Richard's point, I think it is great to kind of model behavior. Like modeling behavior is something that I also try to do, but I don't necessarily try to say, hey, I've experienced the exact same thing as you, because that isn't what someone wants to hear, right? So I think that really Destiny and Richard kind of hit all the nails on the head, and all I'm doing is just making sure, maybe I'm actually being redundant and just not knocking this board into like obliterating it or something. I'm going to stop with that metaphor, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Alexandra.
That's funny. Well, those were the questions that I actually had in regards to this session, but we do have 4 more minutes, and I'm not sure if you all wanted to add some last notes or some final thoughts, maybe wanted to add something specific regarding racial justice or some insight. I just wanted to provide a little bit of space. And then, if you're open to answering any questions now, of course, I will follow up with y'all with the follow-up questions that I receive on my end. Y'all let me know. And again, thank you so much for coming to share. I know that like this helps me, be a better professional. It helps me get up in the morning and like have somebody at work to look forward to. It's really great to know the strengths of the people that I work with. And that is one of my de-escalation strategies, is knowing who I work with and knowing their strengths and recognizing that I do not have all the strengths and I'm going to have to rely on some folks. And so that is my de-escalation strategy. And I used it for this organization of this workshop, and it worked out. Okay, as a goal. So with that being said, are there any final thoughts that y'all would like to share?
Well, I would just like to say, just like to thank the Joint Office, and thank you, Leandra, for all the hard work. This was a incredibly informative. I've learned a lot today, and I'm glad that I'm able to share. I just want folks to know, and which many may already know, but there's significant trauma out here. As Black men, and I'm speaking as a Black man. This is immediate and personal. There's a recent study that said 62% of all Black men have directly experienced a traumatic event. 72 have witnessed a traumatic event that of a friend or a acquaintance or family member. 56% of Black men have unmet mental health needs from that trauma. So we're dealing with significant threshold of trauma. If you superimpose that onto being homeless and superimpose that onto the COVID, our circumstances with respect to COVID, this is pretty significant. So to understand the contextually what's going on, I think is very important in our work. Many of us of color, period, but I'm just speaking as a Black man. Many of us are dealing with significant issues out here, and we just need to be cognizant of that as we do this work. We should be, very aware that there's a lot of dynamics at play, a lot of moving pieces, and we need forums like this, we need trainings like this, and we need to rely on each other as colleagues with respect to processing a lot of what we experience here. So.
Thank you, Richard. You just took like my last portion. I don't have to say that now after this. That was cool. Destiny, Josh, final thoughts?
I think that the one thing I would say just is that, like, each day that we wake up, we have an opportunity, right, to choose either to perpetuate systems of oppression, perpetuate racism, or reject systems of oppression and reject racism. So I hope that as y'all are leaving this presentation, leaving this de-escalation training, that you think about the ways that you show up in the world, the ways that you are perpetuating systems of oppression and racism, or rejecting and pushing back against those things, because it's through the sum total of all of the different ways that people, individuals, and communities have rejected racism that we're all able to be here today. And it's also through our collective action that we can create a better tomorrow for ourselves and for our families and for our children. So, I mean, I'm not trying to, that came off as a little corny, but, you know, real talk, that I think that we all have the opportunity today and each day to reject racism and reject systems of oppression.
Thank you, Joshua.
Alexandra's looking at me through the screen, so I would just encourage everybody, as we go forward, to just take that time to really truly educate yourself about what people of color are living through, not just during the pandemic, but in years before and in the years to come. It's not going to be a walk in the park for so many of us. And recognizing all of the barriers that so many of us have overcome to get to these points, even to just be alive and breathing before you, that in itself is a testament to our resiliency, and a testament to us carrying on for all of the people who've come before us, and we owe that to each other to care for one another. And I really appreciated what was said earlier about de-escalating a situation when you show up to that space and you meet somebody, providing for their most basic needs in that space if you're able to, just thinking of each other as our own kin, and recognizing how we would want to be cared for in those moments, and applying those trauma-informed lenses and all of these other lenses that we need to really fully support one another is super important. And it's a daily learning, like Josh was saying, accepting that challenge each morning to actively work against oppression. And thanks so much, Alexandra. Thanks so much to everyone for being here. I really, truly value everybody who is a Black person in this space just coming and showing up here. Anyone who's an indigenous person, anyone who's a person of color, everyone who's in this space, we're all going through something together separately. So just, I appreciate everybody being here today.
That was so awesome. So sweet. Thank you so much, keynote speakers. Everybody want to unmute and give a round of applause? Don't they do that? Clap, a round of applause.
And let's all thank Alexandra. Alexandra, thank you for putting this all together. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Oh, please. Listen, we're creating history. We are interrupting oppression. I came to the joint office list. Let's go. No, seriously. I just want to get grounded. If people know me, I have this motto: I either go through it, over it, and around it. And I'm willing to bring as many people in, you know what I'm saying? And many people in that are willing to do the work, you know what I'm saying? And change and willing to grow. And that's my whole purpose in this. I'm so grateful to have this opportunity. And I do want to get better. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow. But I do want to just take a moment real quick. And I do want to say a couple words that I hope that you resonate with y'all. And they're just success words that may resonate with you, but I want us to end on a very positive note. And so I'm just gonna say the quick little run through some notes. I'm gonna run through some words, and hopefully you think of them as affirmations, and you think of them as words to describe you and your professionalism and your ability to de-escalate. And then I will just tell you about tomorrow, and what to expect tomorrow. And then I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Okay? All right, thanks for rolling with me. I've never tried this before, but we have to speak greatness into ourselves. We have to. And this is the time that I'm gonna do it. So you are brave. You are persistent. You are solid. You are patient. You are ambitious. You are resilient. You are resourceful. You're a doer, you're consistent, you're constant, capable, you're quick, wise, bold, resourceful, unstoppable, unique, zealous, and alive. You are alive. And what are we going to do with what we have? That's what we can focus on. And that is interrupting oppression, and that is racial justice. So we covered a lot. Recap, all right? So let's just try to become acutely aware of racism and the system. Let's lean in and pause. Let's learn to pause and think and feel before acting out. Understand your power, your privilege, and your resiliency. Develop the ability to experience discomfort without self-deprivation. Become skillful at making harm reduction, anti-violence, and non-violent crisis intervention practices. Create your own. You can create your own. What worked for you? You are the expertise in your own lives. What has worked with you? And try that on others. Have non-judgmental compassion for yourself and others who struggle. The struggle is real, it's enduring, but I love to feel because it lets me know that I'm alive. And build a mindful lifestyle, including transparency, accountability.
Thank you.
And owning your vessel. And your vessel is this, your vessel is inside you. So own your vessel, trust your vessels, take care of your vessels. And I really appreciate this opportunity again. And then feel free to follow up with me via email or GChat or however it happens. And I'll make sure that I continue to grant folks access to all these tools. Tomorrow, we will start same time, same place, 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, Rhea Graves will be leading us in 3 hours from 9 to 12 with assertive engagement. Rhea is phenomenal. And so I would highly encourage y'all to come ready and to engage. Tomorrow will be a more engaging day. We're going to have assertive engagement in the morning, and in the afternoons, we're going to break out into groups, and that's totally optional. Break into groups and do some situational awareness scenarios. And then we'll bring it back to talk about like concrete examples of crisis intervention. Examples can include suicidal ideation, mental health conditions. There's another one, oh, substance use. All right, see, I'm slipping. So we'll try to come back, but that's going to be more engaging. So like, what's working over there for you? What's working for me? What's working at your agency? How can we start sharing these resources and what works well and what doesn't work well? And then we're pretty much going to be, the last section actually is professional boundaries and ethics, and I will be leading that section. And that's it. It will cap off our day. Does that sound cool? I really appreciate y'all. I had fun.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
I do want
Thank
to
you.
thank you. Thank you. I do want to say thank you to Paul Stark and Mia and Chris and Josh and Destiny and Richard again, and for everybody that came. Have a good day, okay?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're amazing.
Oh, thank you, Trisha. I'm so happy you came. I'm
Yes,
so
you did.
happy that you got the
I
registration.
didn't sleep today.
Oh,
I stayed up. I got off work at 8 and jumped right on.
oh my, see, that's dedication. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you.
It's such good information though, seriously.
I appreciate that coming from you because you have facilitation experience. You know exactly what's going on.
I know a lot what's going on, so it's good to sit and like to talk and kind of like decompress and unpack it, you know what I'm saying, in a safe environment. Because
Oh,
we don't get it very often.
that's what's up. That's good feedback. Any ways that we can provide opportunities like this, let us know. And we'd be glad to like explore and tighten up stuff and package it up really nice. So thank you so much. Go to sleep.
Thank you. Well, I have to work at 4, so I'm my day's going. So I'll sleep when I'm dead, but that's okay. I will see you in the morning.
Okay, I appreciate you.
I
Bye.
appreciate you more. Bye.
Thanks, Alexandra.
You're welcome, Richard. Thank you for bringing it home too, definitely in regards to like how you feel and like what it's like. Like I appreciate that because I didn't know exactly how I was going to connect that, but you did great. Awesome.
But thank you for allowing me to participate. It was an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.